Hello and welcome into episode 25 of Preps to Pros. I'm Cooper Petagna with Andrew Ivins, and we got a great show for you today. We're going to be reacting to Matt Rhule out with the Carolina Panthers into season 3, one of the hottest names in the coaching cycle right now already after less than 3 years in Carolina. We'll also talk about the fallout from week 6, maybe some potential recruits that are going to have an impact in the 2023 cycle as freshmen. We're also going to talk about the true freshman impact, and we'll recap with the 2 minutes. But Drew, where in the heck is Andrew Ivins right now? I see that blue 24/7 sports background right now. I know you're out on the road. Drew, who are you going to go see tonight?
Big one. Hurricane Ian, they moved all these games around. So we got Orlando Jones versus Kissimmee Osceola. 4 top 247 prospects in that. Malik Bryant, the Miami linebacker commit, Derek LeBlanc, the Oklahoma D-line commit, John Walker, the UCF commit, and then, rankings are coming out, Cooper. My guy, Jakeem Jackson, I'm getting some eyes on him, the top 247 corner committed to the Florida Gators. I'm excited to see him. So full coverage will be later on 24/7 Sports. But, hey, we're putting in the mileage. We're getting the eyes on the guys, not just watching the film, so I'm fired up.
There you go. We'll have an update to the 2023 Top 247 on Wednesday. That will be on 247sports.com. So make sure you're looking out for that. But Drew, kind of some news that it really wasn't much of a surprise expected at this point. But after a 1-4 start to the season with the Carolina Panthers, 11-27 through 3 seasons with Carolina, Matt Rhule out as the head coach there. They make the change. And this is one that will have some implications in the college football world, because if you take a look at Matt Rhule's resume dating back all the way to his time at Temple, a guy that went to the postseason in 3 out of the 4 seasons there, and then with Baylor as well, won 11 games in his final season in 2019 at Baylor, but a guy that's had a lot of success building programs and putting guys in the NFL. Drew, 5 Power 5 jobs open right now. There's been a lot of chatter about Nebraska, Auburn, and a handful of others. Which place do you think makes the most sense for Matt Rhule?
Well, I think Nebraska, but I think with Matt Rhule, Cooper, you kind of just used 2 of those words, program builder. That's what I think makes Rhule unique. He can go anywhere in the country right now and build something from the ground. You look at his work at Temple. That was a guy that graduated from Penn State, kind of bounced around in the coaching ranks. And when he got to Temple, he realized, hey, I'm not going to get the best athletes. So I'm going to have to, try to find some height, weight, speed, as we call them, traits-based prospects, and develop them, coach them up, get them in the weight room, and hopefully turn them into something. And at Temple, Matt Rhule did just that. I looked it up. Temple, at the start of NFL training camps, they had 29 players on active rosters. Obviously, those get melted down to 53, but that was more than any other group of 5 program out there. And most of those draft picks, most of those guys getting a professional, contract, they were Matt Rhule's recruits. And then we saw him do the same thing at Baylor. Cooper, go back to the NFL scouting combine, the most recent one. Baylor had 2 of the 3 fastest 40-yard dashes there. So we saw what he could do at Temple. We saw what he could do in the middle of Texas. And I think that's what makes Matt Rhule unique. He can essentially go anywhere, set up shop, set up a recruiting department, set up a scouting department, start hosting camps, and then coach those guys up. So, I don't have one school for him. I think Nebraska makes a ton of sense. I think maybe Wisconsin, if they wanted to go down that route. The big thing with Matt Rhule is he's got no ties in the Midwest. So we'll see. Coop, what do you think? Who do you think is licking their chops right now that he's officially on the market?
It has to be Nebraska. You mentioned them before, and I think Nebraska is a developmental program. We've talked a lot about Wisconsin and how those 2 programs are very similar that way. And you look at Matt Rhule's resume, where he's been all the way going back to his time at Temple. He's been an area-based recruiter, a guy that really did a good job in the states of New Jersey and Pennsylvania. His 3 cycles in Baylor, he had 15-plus in-state commitments in every cycle from 2017 to 2019 at Baylor. So if you look at that track record, I think that's going to be really important. But it also begs the question, if he were going to go to a place like Nebraska or Wisconsin, Andrew, this was the question we had with Jim Leonhard, or any coach who's going to step in to one of these 2 positions. Where are you going to get your skill level talent from. And I think at Baylor, he was in a really good situation where there were a lot of trait-based players, where you talked about Texas, one of the best states, has more top 247 players than any other state in the country as of now in the 2023 cycle. So that goes to show, I think that recruiting area is going to be really critical for him as he makes a decision. And you mentioned he was only in year 3 of a 7-year deal. He is still owed $42 million over the next 4 years, making $840,000 a month for the next 48 months. So I think he can be really patient. And I think Matt Rhule wanted an opportunity at the highest level, and that was on Sundays. What's the next big thing? The best thing to that, I think on Saturdays, that's the SEC. And when you look at a place like Auburn, I think this is a place between the resources, the investment, the facilities, geographically, the area, how talented it is in the Southeast. I think this is a place that makes a lot of sense for Matt Rhule as well. I think the biggest thing with Auburn is going to be alignment. That is something that they have not had a lot of success in the last 2 eras of coaching changes at Auburn on the Plains, whether that be Gus Malzahn or right now what you're seeing with Brian Harsin. So I think a guy with the credibility of Matt Rhule can come in and give this place a little bit of stability and somebody that can give them a clear vision and be successful. But Drew, I mean, there's a handful of others out there. Arizona State has already been mentioned. Georgia Tech also looking for a head coach. We'll talk about them later. And right now, Drew, I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat. But if you're Texas A&M right now, I know they played Alabama really well. 3-3 team. We kind of saw this with Dan Mullen last year in the Florida Gators. Hey, are things going awry a little bit? If something were to happen there, and it's a crazy world, I understand that. I don't think this is going to happen. But if the Aggies were to be a 6-6, 7-5 team, and all of a sudden you got those deep pockets in College Station, they want to pony up, they want to make a move. This is a guy that could take advantage of a roster that is ready-made to compete. They got to get that quarterback situation right. But hey, I've seen crazier things, but that's one right there. And Drew, I know you got another wild card as well when it comes to Matt Rhule.
I think Louisville, what happens there with Scott Satterfield? I think Louisville, top 20 ranked recruiting class right now. We've seen from their end, whether that's the collective or the school, they're also invested. And I think Matt Rhule could set up shop there, centrally located, and go and get guys and be competitive in a conference where you don't have to face Alabama every year. You don't have to face Georgia every year. So I think that's another job that makes some sense. And Coop, I'll say this, any college football fan that isn't too familiar with Matt Rhule's work, I encourage you to look up a story. Chris Hummer, our colleague at 24/7 Sports, he wrote it actually 3 years ago, and it takes a deep look at what Rhule did at Baylor and why things work there and why things worked at Temple. He's a player's first coach. A lot of guys believed in him. There was Temple players that were cheering for him publicly when he left for Baylor and just hoping for his success. But, Hummer has a ton of great quotes in there. I think one of my favorite ones came from one of the recruiting directors. Hey, if we're going to miss, well, we're going to miss fast. And there was times when they would just recruit based off the track sheets coming out of the Texas State meet. So, I think it makes a ton of sense. But, Rhule needs to decide, does he want to keep coaching? I think he does. I've spent some time around Manny Diaz since his exit at the University of Miami. And a lot of these guys, they want to kind of write their name. So we'll see. But Cooper, I think you mentioned one really important thing. The ball's in his court. He can take as much time as he wants, and he can sit and wait for the perfect opportunity. So who knows what's going to open up over the next few months.
We'll have no shortage of suitors at the collegiate level. And if you look back at, hey, what went wrong at the NFL level, take a look at the quarterback room. Cam Newton, Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, a lot of these options for Matt Rhule kind of ran dry. They took a shot at Deshaun Watson this offseason. That did not materialize. He was never able to get that quarterback room right. And now he's here. He's on the open market. So one of these programs, whether it's Nebraska, Auburn, or maybe a team that's not even in the field yet, we'll see where Matt Rhule ends up. But Drew, go ahead.
Point this out. Matt Rhule, at one point when he's at Temple, guess who he had committed? Kenny Pickett, first-round pick. A guy that led Pittsburgh to an ACC title. So maybe he can get the quarterback situation figured out at one of these schools, that plays on Saturdays.
I had to get that in. That's important. Before we segue to segment number 2, make sure you subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Also, make sure you give us a like and leave a comment as well. A lot of good stuff happening right now, especially as recruiting is starting to pick up as we head into the later months before early signing period. But Drew, let's get to segment 2 with an eye on the future. And this was kind of something that we had been keeping our eye on. I talked about it before the season, a couple of rooms that maybe had me a little bit hesitant if their plan B was going to have to play. But the importance of having 2 legitimate arms in today's college football, especially if you're going to contend in a 4-team college football playoff format. And we've seen that already. Bryce Young, the Heisman winner from last year, going down. Jalen Milroe has been able to steady the ship, stepping in against Arkansas last week, earlier in the first half, and then this week against A&M, making enough plays to help Alabama overcome and win that game. Drew, Hudson Card with Texas, we talked about in the beginning of the year, that quarterback battle. We said, hey, Hudson Card was going to be needed at some point in this season to win the game. He steadied the ship there as Texas is starting to find their footing. But we could go on and on here. And on the flip side of that, we've kind of seen what has happened to teams like Oklahoma, who have gotten in the situation where they have failed to create an explosive play since Dylan Gabriel left last week against TCU. So this is important, but not only currently, and we're seeing that play out in the current landscape of college football, but when you look at this, Drew, what are your thoughts and your opinions on the shape of your quarterback room, and how do you not only recruit but retain 2 arms, which are very important to your success?
I think it's one of the biggest kind of storylines that's brewing right now in college football. How do you manage those rooms? And I think when you have a quarterback room, normally you have the starter, a guy behind him, and a guy behind him. But all those guys that are in there, you need to think that they have a chance. Once someone leaves for the NFL, once someone graduates, hey, the next guy's up, and then it's eventually going to be my turn. And obviously at Oklahoma, a lot of people left for USC, but I think the big picture is you build out a roster, you gotta figure out how to make everyone believe that they have a chance of coming in. And obviously it's Alabama, but I think with Jalen Milroe and Bryce Young there, I mean, Nick Saban has this thing figured out. And look, they got 2 quarterbacks committed right now heading into next year. But I just think one of the big storylines, how do you make that quarterback room work in an era now where kids can move around so freely, right? You don't have to be a grad transfer. You can transfer one time and be eligible right away. I mean, with Jalen Milroe, I think what's unique about him is he just gives Alabama a little something different on offense with his legs. He ran for 83 yards in that win over Texas A&M. So something to think about when we talk about not only the transfer portal market, but quarterback rooms. I mean, what are they going to do at Texas A&M? Because they don't have an arm committed right now in the class of 2023. They aren't in on anyone in 2024. So do you take another transfer? I think that's something that we need to talk about and address.
Well, let's talk about that right now since you bring it up. Haynes King, who played pretty well, was this past week against Alabama, almost won that game. The Aggies on a last-second play there. But Haynes King, the starter coming in the season, we've seen a little bit of Max Johnson. He goes down with an injury last week, the transfer from LSU, and you start to look at Texas A&M's quarterback room and the future of it. Jimbo Fisher right now sitting at 3-3. There's been a lot of talk about a stale type of offense that Jimbo Fisher is running. Has he evolved as a play caller? Would he give up those type of duties to give up to maybe get more of a refreshed lens for the Aggies offense? But Drew, it is a interesting question because, some of these names come up. We start thinking about guys like Dante Moore and Malachi Nelson. Malachi Nelson obviously committed to the Trojans. Dante Moore committed to Oregon. A lot of these top arms that have been on campus in College Station for Texas A&M. Jaden Rashada, another one, committed to Miami. Austin Novosad was a guy really flirting with the Aggies at one point as well. And as much as Jimbo Fisher loves Connor Wigman, and as much as we really like Connor Wigman in the evaluation process, that is a lot of weight on his shoulders to be the person that is the key to success for Texas A&M in their future. Because, Drew, we saw it this weekend, the amount of freshmen that Texas A&M played this weekend against Alabama, and a lot of these guys not shy of the big moment in this game. I mean, these guys are going to be ready to be a contender in the SEC West if they can get the other aspects of their program together, and that's a big if.
Yeah, and with Connor Wegman, when you watch Texas A&M, it seems like the quarterbacks they're so scripted in what they do. It's a simple drop. You go through your progressions, and that's it. There's no improvising. There's no get outside the pockets. And from what I saw of Connor Wegman on the TV games, from what I saw of him at Under Armour All-America game last year, I think he's at his best when he's on his move and kind of freelancing a little bit. So I think that's one thing you got to address with Texas A&M. Cooper, we just saw that graphic come up of all the quarterbacks, the top-ranked guys in the class of 2023. You know who intrigues me on that list for potentially for Texas A&M? Our guy Avery Johnson, a true dual threat talent that can stretch it out and let it fly down the field. I'm not saying Texas A&M should go in that direction, but to me, when you look at that quote unquote stale offense, I think Avery's someone that can provide a spark given what he can do with his legs, just when you look at the rest of that group that we got at the top.
And we'll wait and see with Connor Wegman. I think the thing about him that's different, he kind of offers a little bit of a different dynamic in that offense, maybe similar to Kellen Mond and what he brought, a guy that you have to account for with his legs. So we'll see what happens there with Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M, as right now a lot of expectations for the Aggies coming into the season. They're sitting at 3-3. It's been a roller coaster of a year, but Drew, a team that has struggled, especially since the absence of Dylan Gabriel when he left with concussion-like symptoms against TCU, has been Oklahoma. We talked a lot at the beginning of the season. Maybe this was an area of concern, the lack of depth and the lack of experience in Oklahoma's quarterback room. Well, you look to the future, and they're in really good hands. There's a lot of reason to be optimistic, because that means five-star Jackson Arnold is on his way to Norman. And Drew, the more I watch this guy, 20-2 as a starter, 6A competition in the state of Texas at Denton Guyer, 60% completion rate, very athletic, a guy to me that is very well seasoned and plays at a high level of football in the state of Texas. Elite 11 MVP. I think from a temperament standpoint and from a skill set standpoint, there is a really good chance that he could see the field early. Obviously, that's going to depend a lot on what happens with Dylan Gabriel. He's got another year of eligibility, but Jackson Arnold, to me, is a guy that can step in day one and make an impact in Norman.
Well, as crazy as it sounds, Cooper, we're 6 games into the season. We're already talking about the quarterback of the future. You go back to that Red River Showdown or whatever they call it now. Nick Evers never got into the game. The former Elite 11 quarterback from last year who Jeff Lebby and co flipped really late from Florida in the cycle. Remember, Billy Napier came in. Nick Evers was all but set to go to UF in Gainesville, and he ends up flipping over to the Sooners, signs with them. I was shocked he did not get on the field. You can, as a freshman, you can preserve a red shirt and still appear in 4 games. Why not get him some live reps? So I think I know you are all in on Jackson Arnold. I'm still kind of a little hesitant, wait and see mode. I still got that bad taste from the Under Armour Future 50 event where Jackson struggled a little bit, and I know it's 7-on-7. But yeah, I think if you're a Sooners fan, number one, you got to address that defense. They got to figure that out. And we've said, Cooper, the number one thing there is going to be keeping that group together that's committed. There's a lot of potential difference makers there, but you got to start, buying in and investing into Jackson Arnold being the future a lot sooner rather than later.
Sooners going through it right now, 49-0 loss to Texas, as Texas avenges that loss from last year, Steve Sarkisian in his first year. So Brent Venables, Steve Sarkisian could definitely relate in year one right now, going through a lot of adversity. To me, Drew, just the last thing on Oklahoma, they have the right pieces. I believe in Brent Venables. I believe in what they're doing. I believe in what they're bringing in, and I believe in the offense coordinator in Jeff Lebby. So a lot of adversity right now for a lot of first-year head coaches, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But Drew, one of the last segments here that we are going to hit on, Texas. We're going to talk about that team a little bit, and there's been a lot made about the quarterback situation. Quinn Ewers coming back off the injury, obviously playing really well there. The skill position, what they're bringing in addition to guys like Xavier Worthy and some of the guys they already have in the boat. But Drew, the running back position, I feel as much as we talk about Texas, we don't talk enough about Bijan Robinson. And that's kind of crazy because I feel like everybody else does that for us. But one of the most dynamic players in the country, and as Bijan is certainly going to leave for greener pastures here, they're going to take his talents to Sundays. Drew, there's another guy from the state of Florida that's going to be playing his ball in Austin here pretty soon that you feel pretty good about.
Cedric Baxter Jr. I mean, this guy's having as good of a senior season as I think anyone in the country. Through 6 games, he's rushed for 128 times for just over 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns, averaging 9.3 yards per carry. He ran for 272 against Don Bosco out of New Jersey. I mean, this guy is a beast. So I think when everyone thinks about Texas, Bijan's eventually going to be gone. Everyone wants to talk about the quarterbacks, Quinn Ewers. He's got this talented arm, and then you got Arch Manning coming in. Well, I think when we look into the crystal ball for the Longhorns, they're not going to miss a beat at running back. And so Rashard Choice, the running backs coach there, I think he deserves a ton of credit for getting Baxter committed. And what's crazy is they could get the number one guy in the class of 2024 after Baxter and Jarrett Gibson. So I think the ground game looks good for Texas moving forward. I think if you're Oklahoma, we'll see how the schedules shake out as both those schools enter SEC play. But anyone that has to square off with UT moving forward is going to have to worry about stopping that run. And I think Cedric Baxter, he's one of the best. Coop, I've said it in the past. He's a guy that I'm pounding the table for him to get that 5th star. So all Texas fans know that I really, really like him.
On the cusp right now, the number 31 player in the top 247, and number 2 running back behind Texas native Reuben Owens, currently committed to Louisville. Cedric Baxter, listen, when I look at Bijan Robinson, when I look at Roschon Johnson, what Texas has in their backfield, you better be able to catch the football. Texas uses all 3 of their backs beautifully. You throw in Keelan Robinson there. I love Steve Sarkisian in his offense, the way he utilizes his backs. I think that's a part of Cedric Baxter's game, Drew, that we've seen in person at these 7-on-7 events. And people say, hey, what can you get from live exposure at 7-on-7? Well, a lot of the time Cedric Baxter is split out, or a lot of the times you get a really good feel for how these guys catch the ball and run out of the backfield. Can they separate? Cedric Baxter, a big back, but very sudden, and a guy, to me, that's a very natural pass catcher. I look forward to that in Austin. Drew, I don't know how you feel about that, but that's kind of the way I see it. I like his upside as a receiver.
Well, it's funny, Cooper. When Cedric Baxter, the first time I ever met him, I went by his school, and his coach told me, hey, I think he's a safety long term. I think he's an NFL safety. Then they tried him out at wide receiver, and he eventually found his way to running back. So I agree. I remember Pylon, Orlando. We were freezing our butts off out there. I don't even think you had a sweater. Like, you were just trying to shove your hands into your gloves. And Cedric Baxter, I remember, had like 4 touchdowns one game, and that was an elite tournament. But you're right. I mean, you can see a guy, his ball skills, how they track it. And most of the time on these Friday nights, those guys don't get a ton of screens. They just hand it to him. So we know he can catch the ball, and I think that is certainly a plus for Texas.
Well, I'll tell you this, that video game's coming back, NCAA football coming back next year. Texas right now, between Quinn Ewers, Xavier Worthy, what they have coming with Cedric Baxter Jr., and then not to mention Jonte Cook, Ryan Niblett, a lot of speed, a lot of dynamic playmakers on offense. I can tell you that's probably going to be the most played with team on NCAA football 2024. So looking forward to that. Anyway, besides the point, Drew, let's head out west right now in a team. Drew, I've been having to eat it here lately, a team that I kind of jumped on all over the offseason, a team right now with a number 81 ranked recruiting class, but it doesn't matter. That's UCLA, top 12 team in the country. They beat Utah this week in another big win for Chip Kelly in the Bruins. They moved to 6-0 on the season. They got a big matchup coming up this week in Eugene against the Oregon Ducks as Chip Kelly returns to Oregon, where he's had a lot of good stories there. So, Drew, UCLA, looking at them, you wrote a great piece this week, as you do every Monday. Winners and losers, you can find that on 247sports.com. And it's talking a little bit about who are the big winners, who are the big losers in terms of recruiting implications. There's a guy right now, only 7 commits for UCLA in Chip Kelly, but one of those guys, his name is Roderick Robinson out of the San Diego area, Lincoln High School, big physical back. And Texas A&M, Georgia, a couple of the SEC powers have come knocking. But, Drew, just your read on UCLA, their recruiting, big picture, all of it.
I wanted to kind of pick your brain on this, Cooper. So I'm gonna finish this with a question. But Roderick Robinson, a lot of people don't know that name, and why not? I mean, he's a 4-star running back, over 225 pounds, out of the San Diego area. Outside of our circle, our group messages, probably a lot don't know what's going on. But I think it's fascinating. UCLA is off to this 6-0 start. I think our UCLA site just wrote that was the Bruins' biggest win in over a decade. Them handling Utah over the weekend. And, you're Chip Kelly, and you've leaned so heavily on the transfer portal in recent years. And I think that formula works. But let's not forget, UCLA is headed to the Big Ten moving forward. So to me, can they hang on to this high-profile recruit that the SEC powers want? I mean, in all theory, in all reality, I know Chip Kelly can't get everyone inside the Rose Bowl, but life is good if you're UCLA right now. Again, you got DTR at quarterback. You're running the ball like crazy. Zach Charbonnet, 198 yards on the ground. So, if the time is now for Chip Kelly to kind of go after some high school kids and try to make a splash, do it. I mean, right now I look at the California state rankings. UCLA just has 2 of the top 25 guys in state committed. And again, I like what they do in the transfer portal. I think that's an excellent model. And we know that Chip was in the NFL. He's got his taste of that. But take advantage of what you're doing, especially if you beat Oregon. I think UCLA can climb up in those recruiting rankings and get some difference makers, because in the Big Ten, I'll tell you this, it's going to be about depth. It's not going to just be those star impact players. You're going to have to be 3-4 deep at each position.
There's just something missing with UCLA right now, because it's crazy to me. You kind of see this offseason revival from a perceptual standpoint with USC, Lincoln Riley, the big splash hire, USC now in the top 10, UCLA in the top 12, a big showdown with Oregon in a top 15 matchup. But you think about everything UCLA has to offer, not only from an academic standpoint, but right now, if you're on the West Coast and you're in that footprint, you're top 10 in total offense right now, and you're top 10 in scoring offense as well. You have to think that would be able to attract some of the top tier players in that West Coast footprint. And Drew, you bring up a good point. Is this sustainable going into the Pac-12 as they transition into a new conference next season? That's a big question mark for me. And the only reason I say that is because, I was somewhat I had a lot of doubt there even coming into the season, even though that's a veteran team. But is this a sustainable model for Chip Kelly in the future? They've done a really good job there. Back-to-back top 10 transfer classes at UCLA. That's kind of been their mold. A lot of NFL coaching experience on that staff. So they want guys that can come in, that are ready to play physically, that have a little bit more experience in terms of reps. It makes sense for what they're trying to do. They're going to microwave it. Is that something that you can replicate year in and year out? It's really fascinating. It's fascinating to study from a personnel lens as well. But you mentioned Zach Charbonnet, the one-time Michigan standout, transfers to UCLA from the state of California originally. That's kind of the market that they're in right now. So UCLA living well. Big matchup for them coming up this week, like I said, against Oregon. We'll keep an eye on them. We'll keep an eye on Roderick Robinson as well. But just one more reminder before we go to segment 3, 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe, like, comment. Guys, that helps us out a lot. So thank you for tuning into us, our 25th episode, if you can believe that, with Cooper Petagna and Andrew Ivins, the Oyster Boyz and Preps to Pros. But Drew, segment 3 for us, my friend, freshman impact. We want to take a look. Each of us will pick 3 guys here, and I'm going to let you start. And let's start with a guy that made an impact, the number 1 receiver in the class of 2022 last year. That was Evan Stewart. Didn't even play his senior year of high school as he opted out. But, man, was he all over the place in Tuscaloosa on Saturday.
He was the spark plug for the Aggies on offense. I remember I got up to go to the fridge in the middle of the game, come back right before half, and Texas A&M had advanced the ball, and Stewart was the reason. And if you know anything about Evan Stewart, on my initial freaks list for the class of 2022, he was number 3. This is a guy that could have potentially played in a World Cup. He was part of the U.S. men's national team youth pool of players before he decided to focus strictly on the sport of football. He also did track and field, 5'9" in the long jump to win a state title. You're seeing that explosive traits right there. So when me and Cooper throw all these track numbers on you and you want to see it translate to the game, this catch right now on your screen, the other catch before that, that's what we're talking about. I thought Evan Stewart was awesome. I hope he keeps it going. I don't know about that play call going to him there late with, what less than a few seconds left. I didn't agree with that. I think for a guy that's playing above everyone else's shoulder pads, have him run an option route and go up and get it. But no, Evan Stewart was awesome. He's rounding into form, and I expect big things for him over the next few years because with the talent's there. I always go back to Florida's Friday Night Lights camp 2 summers ago. I think Evan ran 4 routes and scored touchdowns on 4 of them, and those all came against defensive backs that are now playing Power 5 football. So special kid, special talent. Hope we keep seeing more of it.
Says a lot that he didn't play his senior season, was able to hold on to that number 1 ranked receiver ranking in the 2022 cycle. So Evan Stewart, I think if you're an Aggies fan, you want to take something positive away from that. A lot of freshmen playing. Drew's going to talk about that in the 2-minute drill, but Aggies certainly talented all over the field. Chris Marshall making a lot of plays opposite of him as well. Drew, I'm going to go with A.J. Swan, the new signal caller in Nashville, with our good friend Barton Simmons and company over there. Played well against Ole Miss this weekend on Saturday. You look at that stat line, 27 of 38, 281 yards out of the state of Georgia, a guy that we had as a 3-star, Drew, a guy as you had as an 89, and you kind of go back and you look at him a little bit in his high school career, 22 touchdowns, 7 INTs as a senior at Cherokee High School in Georgia so far this year, 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He's taking care of the football. And you start to look at Vanderbilt football, if you're Clark Lee, the improvement that we've seen from year 1 to year 2, I think this team's starting to get a little bit more competitive in the SEC. You also, the playmaker, Jade McGowan on the outside, the freshman receivers went over 100 yards in this game. So I think if you're Clark Lee, it's incremental, but this is the type of improvement, Drew, you want to see.
A.J. Swan, he was one that we kind of fought back and forth about being a 4th star or not. I remember seeing him play a ton of 7-on-7. I saw him all week at the Under Armour All-America practices. And I'll be honest, he's just a guy that threw a lot of picks, right? So that's why I think we kind of hesitated on going from the 89 to 90. And just so people are familiar, anyone that we rank as an 89 in my eyes, that should be someone where there's a debate back and forth, and we'll see what happens with A.J. Swan. Does he make a training camp one day? I don't know. But I think if you're a Vanderbilt fan or you are a fan of someone in the SEC, you got to be like, dang, now we got to play this kid, and we know he can throw it around. He's going to take some shots. I think it's encouraging, and I think he's going to be an interesting case study for us. And don't forget, Vandy flipped him from Mike Loxley in Maryland. So that was a big recruiting win for them. But no, Coop, that's a great one. I'm going to go in the next direction. Kelvin Banks, the 24/7 Sports Freshman of the Week. That was named by Chris Hummer. I mean, this is a guy that's starting up front. Again, go back to that Under Armour All-America game, and I'm going to keep doing that, Cooper. But you talked about it a few weeks ago on the show. Those in-person evaluations are so important. And Banks, when you see him on film, you knew he was a big guy that could move people out of the way. But when we saw him do one-on-ones in Orlando, he was just a different player than some of the other guys in his group. I mean, he was excellent against Oklahoma. He held his own against Alabama earlier on. I think if you're Cedric Baxter, if you're Quinn Ewers, if you're Arch Manning, you know that you got this guy for probably 2 more years. So no, he was awesome and someone that we had very high in the rankings.
Yeah, we had him in the top 32. We finished at number 30. I believe we had him as a number 3 offensive tackle. I'm kind of kicking myself right now that I didn't fight harder for him. I thought he was the best tackle in the country always, and I thought that he was the most day one ready as well. We're seeing that right now in Austin as that young offensive line getting a lot of valuable experience. But Drew, I'm going to go offensive side of the ball. I'm going to go to the running back, and I'm going to go all the way up to Boise State in the Mountain West Conference. And I got to get a lot of credit to my man, Gabe Brooks, right here as he fought for this one. This is running back Ashton Jeanty out of Lone Star High School in Frisco, Texas. And the guy that just went for 100 yards in the first time in his career this past weekend is Boise State beat a battered Fresno State team 40-20, and they needed that one. But Ashton Jeanty this Saturday, 19 carries, 109 yards, 2 touchdowns. And you know what? You look back, and Drew, we kind of say, all right, what are the redeeming qualities? What are the traits? What was the thing that put us over the top here? 11-1-3 in the 100-meter. This is a 3-sport athlete, a very accomplished basketball player as well. Averaged over 8 points on the hardwood. So that's a guy, when you start to look at the traits, check box, check box, check box, and a guy that plays big. Keith Bonenfelder, running back coach up there in Boise State, doing a really good job. Has a track record going down in the state of Texas, being able to find some guys, Doug Martin being one of those guys as well, that have been a little bit overlooked in the past. So Boise State looks like they got a good one. Nash and Genty looks like he's going to be the guy of their future. But Drew, I know you kind of want to go running back SEC here, and a guy that we really like coming out of the state of Mississippi.
Branson Robinson, SEC Freshman of the Week. I think he was at 98 yards. We saw him in there against Auburn. And man, you said Boise finds him. Georgia just finds these running backs. This is a guy, for me, number 5 on my freaks list for that class of 2022. And when he signed with Georgia, or when he was going to sign with Georgia, kind of the rumblings coming out of Athens, but hey, he's another Nick Chubb. And why was he another Nick Chubb? This is a guy that has a Mississippi State record, 720-pound deadlift on record. He's got a 630-pound back squat, 370-pound bench. I'm assuming now that he is at UGA, those numbers are only going up. But man, Georgia, they find him. They want to ground and pound in a pro-style attack. Branson Robinson, I think this was his introduction party. We're going to be hearing this name a lot over the next 3 years, especially if you watch the Mothership SEC on CBS every Saturday. Branson Robinson, remember that name.
I don't know if I saw a more physically imposing skill position player or mid-skill position player last year than Branson Robinson. He looked day one ready in the SEC. We don't say that a lot. He made his coming out party this past weekend. But Drew, I'm going to end with Jaleel Florence, a top 247 standout and a cornerback from that same school of Roderick Robinson in Lincoln High School in San Diego. Big weekend for him as the Oregon Ducks, beat Arizona this weekend convincingly. 4 tackles, 1 interception for Jaleel Florence. Great size coming out of San Diego, 6'1.5", 180 pounds, 10.77 in the 100-meter. It makes you feel better about these guys. We continue to say that. But Oregon, what they're doing in the secondary, you really like. Jaleel Tucker, another guy. Christian Gonzalez coming over from Colorado and playing opposite and being one of their more refined standout players with a lot of NFL upside there. So Oregon getting it done in the secondary. Defensive coordinator Tosh Lupoy's got to be happy with that new development as well. Those guys are really hard to find. So big one. Jaleel Florence looks like he's coming along for the Ducks. And Drew, that kind of does it for our freshman impact. That looks, and if you're just joining this show, episode 25, we are still trying things out. Hopefully that's going to be a staple for us every Monday as we highlight the best freshmen each Saturday making the biggest impact all around college football. But Drew, now it's time for our 2-minute drill as we wrap up today's show. And I know there was kind of some eerie similarities of Texas A&M, Alabama that it kind of got you started a little bit and said, wow, there's a lot of young talent on this field. 2 or 3 years from now, there's going to be a lot of guys getting drafted and playing on Sundays.
Well, I said they needed some broadcast just, highlighting these kids and their backgrounds and where they were ranked and why they're important, because I think us in the recruiting industry, I was like, oh, I remember that kid. I remember that kid. And it wasn't from 3 or 4 years ago. It was from 1 or 2 years ago. And it got my mind spinning. And I said, hey, this Texas A&M Alabama game, is this going to be one of these games where, like the LSU-Alabama one from 2019, that was Tua versus Burrow, 55 players selected from that game, including 18 first-rounders? I think so. I mean, I started writing some names down here. You see them on the screen: Evan Stewart, Will Anderson. We know Will Anderson's going in the first round. Jahmyr Gibbs, is he running back 1 in the upcoming draft? Dallas Turner, I think he's selected early. But look at all those young names on that screen. Evan Stewart, we obviously already highlighted him. Shamar Stewart, the former 5-star defensive lineman that the Aggies pulled out of South Florida. I just think, and when it's all said and done, this has a chance to push that group. Maybe there's a dozen first rounders in here. Maybe there's 15, but man, it was really cool to watch that in real time. And, a lot of people thought that game was going to be a blowout. I thought it was pretty admirable how Texas A&M's young guys, and look here, there's that 2019 matchup, Burrow, Tua, all those wide receivers. I think what's different about this LSU-Bama one, way more point of attack, line of scrimmage guys. That LSU-Bama game was a lot of skilled players out on the perimeter. Interesting to see kind of the shifts and the tugs and pulls when it comes to personnel. But no, I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about this game a few years from now and how special it really was.
A lot of talent in College Station, historically the best recruiting class of all time. Jimbo Fisher's got a lot to work with there. So we'll see, Drew. Like you said, man, just watching that game, I think in our position was a joy for us because a lot of these guys we saw last year at this time were playing high school football. Now they're on one of the biggest stages in all of college football. It's pretty neat to see him there. But Drew, I'm going to go a different direction. I'm going to go to the ACC, and I'm going to go with our guy, Brent Key. That is the interim head coach of the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets right now, 2-0 after Georgia Tech dismissed former head coach Geoff Collins and coming off a win, an overtime win against the Duke Blue Devils and a very good team in the ACC this year, Mike Elko has with the Blue Devils. That's a big win. And before that, they go to Pitt. They knock off top 25 ranked Pittsburgh Panthers. So, I think you look at Georgia Tech, this was a team that had snapped a 9-game losing streak by beating Pittsburgh. So they haven't had a ton of success. We talked a lot about this job. Who was going to come in here and kind of incorporate this vision? And you look at Brent Key, I mean, he played his ball there from 1997 to 2000. His first job in college football was at Georgia Tech as a graduate assistant, spent 10 years at Central Florida, then spent 3 years as he replaced Mario Cristobal in Alabama as our offensive line coach. This is a guy who's really well respected in the coaching circles. And we talked a lot about Jim Leonhard, the opportunity that he has in Madison at Wisconsin. Brent Key, right now, I think this is a guy that can generate a lot of positive momentum in the building, within the administration, certainly a guy that is well respected in Atlanta. So I would keep my eyes on that. They got Virginia coming to town next week. That's a really winnable game. They are 3-3 with a chance to get to over 500, 2-1 in ACC play, and as bad of a start as they got off to this season. If you would have said that a couple of weeks ago, I would have called you crazy. So a lot of credit to Brent Key, the staff, and the job that they've done there, and the players buying in to whatever his message is. And Georgia Tech, Drew, to me, that's got a lot of potential to be a really good job. So we'll keep an eye on that one. But, Drew, I want to ask you, we talked about it earlier in the day. You're at your dad's house right now. You're going to go see some games tonight. And you mentioned some of the playmakers that you're going to go see. A lot of these guys in the top 247, Miami commit linebacker Malik Bryan, a top 100 prospect for us. You also have the likes of John Walker, Derek LeBlanc, the Oklahoma commit, and Jakeem Jackson. I just want to know, kind of personally, what are you most excited about seeing tonight?
Jakeem Jackson, because I want to text you on the ride home, be like, hey, I told you he should be much higher in the rankings. No, I'm excited to see that. And there's another kid in that group, Dylan Wade, who's a tight end committed to Maryland. I've hyped him up in the past. This is a kid that only former quarterback, tried tight end out. He's going both ways this season. I think he's really exciting. So I love getting out on the road and finding new names. I mean, there's probably going to be 12 Power 5 kids if you take all the classes and combine them together. Only one state you can really do that, maybe two, Texas, but Florida, that's what makes it unique. So I'm fired up, man.
Our boy Andrew Ivins, always working to provide you the best and most accurate information, especially when it comes to the rankings. I know everybody likes that. But guys, we appreciate you tuning in. Episode 25, like I said, big marker for us. We will be back on Wednesday, 3 o'clock Eastern. And for Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. We'll see you then.